Road bikes are boring these days and all look the same. Where's the cutting edge development? Where's all the innovation? Am I on point? Do you agree? Or am I being unfair and a bit harsh on the bike industry? On one hand, modern road bikes are pretty amazing machines. They're lightweight, they're fast, reliable, which is definitely a key point for me, and they ride extremely well. And in my experience, compared to older bikes, which I've ridden and reviewed here on the channel, buying some second-hand bikes, there's no difference. It's black and white comparing an old bike to a modern bike. So on one hand, road bikes are fantastic these days, and we are living in perhaps a golden era of road bikes, if you ignore the prices, which are a bit higher than they used to be. Now, the point of this video was brought about by watching Paris-Roubaix the other day, and to a lesser extent, Tour of Flanders, my two favourite races of the entire calendar, and my favourite roads to actually ride. Tour of Flanders more than Paris-Roubaix because those cobbles are pretty brutal on the bike and the body. But watching this race and watching Mathieu van der Poel ride to a supreme victory was interesting because the bikes weren't that exciting at all. In fact, they're pretty boring. I mean, Mathieu van der Poel rode both Tour of Flanders and Paris-Roubaix on a regular stock Canyon Aeroad CFR, the same one he uses for all their races around the world. The only change he made to the bike were tyres. Wider tyres, 30 for Tour of Flanders and 32 for Paris-Roubaix, tubeless with inserts. And that is the only change he made to his bike. No other concession to the brutal cobbles, the pavé, the rough roads, just bigger, fatter tyres, not even double wrap bar tape, no other fancy gimmicks or innovation, which is pretty amazing on one hand, but pretty boring on the other hand. Because as a young tech journalist, many years ago, when I first went to Belgium and Northern France to report on these races, I was sent there to get some of the interesting tech that was on display, and there was certainly lots of interesting tech. Paris-Roubaix in particular was a race where you saw all sorts of crazy innovations and adaptations to the bikes to give the riders a bit more comfort and a bit more capability to deal with the cobbles and to survive the punishing road they had to race over. Now, this was a time when road race bikes were very limited on tyre clearance, and that limitation was a big reason we saw some crazy tech at this race. I remember seeing cyclocross bikes because those were the only bikes the team had from their sponsor that could take a 27 or a 30mm wide tyre. Their road bike simply couldn't take a wide tyre. And it was the same across the board as well, which is why we saw a switch from road race bikes to endurance bikes, and that led to the whole development of endurance bikes. The Specialized Roubaix, the Cannondale Synapse, the Bianchi Infinito, the Trek Domani as well. Companies were responding to the needs of the riders for bikes with bigger tyres to allow them to race over the cobbled roads and maintain the speed and get a competitive advantage over their rivals. So more smoothness, more comfort, you go faster and potentially win the race. So that led to a period of quite intense development of endurance bikes, and it's also a race where over the years we have seen suspension on road bikes. Most famously, the Bianchi full suspension road bike. RockShox came out with a suspension fork in the early days of suspension for mountain bikes, and we've seen Pinarello dabble with electronic suspension. Other companies have dabbled with suspension on road bikes, and many companies, if they weren't doing suspension, they're trying to provide more compliance, more bending in the carbon frames. The Specialized Roubaix with the Zert insert, which didn't really do anything, it's more the shape of the carbon fiber that allowed that section of the frame to bend and flex. The elastomer was added to not freak out consumers when they saw a big hole in their carbon frame. And then latterly, the Future Shock as well. And we've seen Cannondale had a head shock at one point as well. Trek had the soft tail, basically mountain bike soft tail technology, which George Hincapie didn't use very successfully, unfortunately. So over the years, we've seen some crazy technology, some crazy solutions at this race, which for me, as a person interested in bike tech, has always made this race the most interesting of the calendar, where you get to see all sorts of crazy contraptions and developments. And these days, well, we don't see any at all really. The most outlandish thing at this year's Paris-Roubaix was the Israel Premier Tech team on gravel bikes, so the modern equivalent of a cyclocross bike 20 years ago. And they were anticipating it being wet and muddy, which it was in the lead up to the race, and running 34mm wide tyres, but in the end the race was run in very dry conditions, and a 32mm wide tyre with plenty for Mathieu van der Poel and most other riders in that race. And that really shows how much the regular road race bike has developed to a point where even Quick-Step are no longer using the Specialized Roubaix, the bike named after the actual race, because the Canyon Aeroad race bike now takes up to a 32mm wide tyre. So they were running 32mm wide tyres on that bike and no longer have need for a Specialized Roubaix, because for most pros, the comfort from a wide tyre and the other enhancements in that frame technology compared to 10-20 years ago is enough for the riding they do. They don't really need or want a super smooth ride. They want it to be smooth enough. They clearly don't mind a bit of punishment, a hard ride, if you've seen a state of their hands and blisters at the end of the race. All with the exception of Mathieu van der Poel, because he wasn't wearing gloves, which definitely helps minimise blisters. Don't have that fabric rubbing between the bar tape and your palm. So in some ways, it's a real shame we don't see more crazy tech innovation at this race as we used to in years gone by, and makes it a boring race to report from a tech point of view. There's no kind of big standout features. There's more kind of small marginal gains here and there, which is a bit boring to report on as a tech journalist, enthusiast of technology on road bikes and gravel bikes and mountain bikes as well. But it does show how good road race bikes, regular bikes like the Super 6 Evo, the Trek and Monda, the Madone and the Tarmac SL8 as well, that those bikes can now be used in this race with just wide tyres being the only change compared to how new bikes were developed just for this race and cyclocross bikes in years gone by as well. So a shame, yes, but also fantastic that modern road bikes are that capable that you don't need a special bike for one race of the year. You can use the same bike year round, with the only change being tyres. And the real reason all this change has happened is disc brakes. And disc brakes have, of course, been a big change on road bikes in the last 10 years, maybe 15 years, actually quite a while when you think about it really. And what disc brakes have allowed on road bikes is wide tyres. And we've seen how powerful that change has been in Paris-Roubaix now being ridden on regular race bikes compared to the special bikes a few years ago. So disc brakes have enabled regular aero race bikes to accommodate wide tyres and no longer just be the reserve of endurance bikes. And it's a real reason why tech at races like Paris-Roubaix and Tour of Flanders is so boring or not as exciting as it used to be, because disc brakes have enabled regular road bikes to take wide tyres, wide enough for the pros to race on. So yeah, disc brakes have led to tech at Paris-Roubaix being pretty boring. Anyway, I want to share my thoughts on this subject as somebody who's been reporting on tech from the front line of road bike racing for the last 20 years or so. Yeah, definitely pros and cons to what's happened on road bikes. I know a lot of people don't like the way road bikes are going with disc brakes and aerodynamics and internal routing. And there are some other observations, shall we say, I want to share on the development of road bikes for better or worse in a future video. But in the meantime, let me know what you think. Am I wrong? Am I right? Let me know by leaving a comment down below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe by hitting that button right there. And if you want to see a video on comparing an old race bike to a new race bike, then watch this video right here. But that's all today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again very soon.